How did Commander Howard Johnston and his B-12s manage to get all their convoys through the danger zone in the summer of 1941 without losing a single ship? To give credit to one man is not at all to diminish the merits of others who may simply have been less fortunate. It's just that I'm very familiar with the activities of B-12. I served nowhere else during that period, but under the command of a superb officer, Commander Howard Johnston. 14 years later, I still think of him as a peer, not as an older comrade. He was 6 or 7 years older than I was. Blonde-haired and thin, he looked younger than his years. The strongest impression on me always made a cheerful enthusiasm with which he took on any problem, even remotely related to his group. The gold tourniquet on the visor of the commander's cap was always new and shiny. Howard Johnston was, of course, the senior officer of the escort group, but he was also too much the leader of a gang of schoolboys. I never once received an order from him that, for whatever reason, irritated me. If I made a mistake, he calmly explained how he would have acted in such a case, and never, even after conducting the heaviest convoys, did he allow himself to show anger or annoyance. We were all proud to be B-12s, and to my knowledge, Howard Johnston held his group in high esteem as well. Even though he hounded us mercilessly, hammering into our heads the next piece of knowledge that he thought would make the group more efficient and effective, he never stopped striving to do better. I consider my time in B-12 to be the best of my life. Sometime later I realized that I owed my ability to command an escort group at sea entirely to Commander Howard Johnston, and as time went on my groups became very similar to B-12. At the beginning of the war we had no radar or plotters, and our most familiar weapon was bluffing. I have already mentioned why German submarines usually pursued the convoy before dark, why they stayed on the surface and used the capabilities of the diesels to get into a convenient position to attack at night. I also mentioned that if there was a wind, they approached from the windward side of the convoy. As a retaliatory measure, we would send a destroyer in the right direction at nightfall to drive the pursuers underwater. When the boats were underwater, the convoy's course was changed by 45 degrees to windward. At midnight they returned to their previous course, but by this time the convoy was already 12 miles further downwind than the enemy could expect, and in the dark the chances of making contact were greatly reduced. Later, when the first, still imperfect radar installations appeared, the destroyer could remain in the distance longer and find its way back after dark. This increased the chances of avoiding an attack. Having received the Commodore's orders, the 50 or even 60 bulky and not very turnable merchant ships were to execute a 45-degree turn with the precision of guardsmen on parade. The sight was exhilarating, especially when the second turn, already deep in the night, was performed in the pouring rain. We were extremely proud of our charges and sincerely regretted if someone did not hear the signal and left the marching order they had to be found and returned. When the Germans pulled many submarines to our convoy, Howard Johnston usually, in addition to the maneuvers already described, put on a little show to distract the enemy. 2 corvettes would move 12 miles off the original path of the convoy, and thus 24 miles off its new route, and set off a small fireworks display. Rockets would fly into the sky, imitating signals from a torpedoed ship, flares would be fired, and 2 or 3 depth bombs would be dropped for sound effect. Sometimes a barrel of fuel oil was set on fire and set afloat. The captains of German submarines on the surface, who were trying to locate the mysteriously vaporized convoy, noticed our performance and concluded that that was where the convoy was. Of course, when they arrived at the place, they realized their mistake, but by that time they were already 24 miles away from the actual location of the convoy, and dawn was getting closer by the hour. Now all such military trickery was a thing of the past. Radar and aviation proved to be better and more reliable. It was with their help we were able to move from defense to offense. Now escort groups worked with air support. The seas were sailed by special groups of hunters who, without a convoy to guard, could devote all their time and energy to destroying the enemy. The Germans were swept out of the Atlantic with a broom. They went to the Caribbean Sea and for a while could enjoy complete impunity there, but very soon those remote waters became too dangerous for them. Then the German submarines started a war with the escort ships, and we realized the first round was ours. What was Dienitz going to do? In the German Navy, you don't just become a Grand Admiral. He must have had something else in store. and in the second round he threw punches that were no less dangerous to the Allies than anything he'd ever done before. Personally, I think the second round was a stalemate, with both sides aiming for the only way out but not having enough forces to break through to it. The damage done by Dinitz's subs at this time was not great, but we sailors who hunted these boats knew for sure we were only holding them back, but we were still a long way from completely destroying them. At the end of 1943, Dönitz presented the acoustic torpedo to the world, in 1944, the snorkel, and in 1945, the Walther submarine. As we have already seen, the acoustic torpedo was not a decisive weapon at all. The snorkel was a different matter. Its appearance allowed the subs to go diesel-powered in an underwater position. The air needed to breathe the diesels came through a large air pipe, at the end of which a valve was installed. Prior to the invention of the snorkel, subs could only use diesel engines while on the surface, and batteries for electric motors could only be charged while the diesels were running. Before the snorkel, subs surfaced to recharge batteries for 4 hours every 24 hours. With a snorkel, they might not have surfaced at all. When the submarine fleet surrendered at the end of the war, it turned out that some subs had been underwater for 6 weeks and were even covered with a film of algae, like that which forms on the bottoms of ships in harbours. Using the snorkel, the subs came close to shore and revisited the places from which we had driven them back in the early months of the war. With the snorkels, their speed increased and became almost as fast as that of an escort ship. It has already been said how our airplanes forced the U-boats to submerge, after which the latter saw almost nothing in the vast expanse of the Atlantic. But if they passed in an underwater position in areas where shipping is always busy, such as, for example, Portland Bill in the English Channel, Cape Wrath in northwest Scotland or Rathlin Island off the northeastern tip of Ireland, they could not fail to find suitable targets. A submarine is a very expensive weapon, so it is highly irrational to let it cruise aimlessly across the ocean without paying for itself by destroying enemy vessels. With submarines equipped with snorkels, Dönitz achieved only a small amount of success, on the basis of which it could be argued that he was defeated in the second round, just as he had been in the first. But that would mean reverting to a purely defensive submarine strategy. If, however, to operate in terms of offensive strategy, where success is measured by the number of enemy ships destroyed, then the merits of both sides, perhaps, can be considered equal. Submarine Walther, which Dönitz planned to use in 1945, had an engine running on a fundamentally new fuel, hydrogen peroxide, burning with diesel fuel. She could go at 20 knots briefly in an underwater position, and she did not have to stay at periscope depth like a snorkel sub. Assuming the support team arrived within an hour of receiving a report of the sub's discovery, it would have to comb an area of about 50 square miles. Walther's much faster submarine increases the search area to 1,200 square miles. This reduces the likelihood of her detection to pure chance. Fortunately for us, none of these boats were ever commissioned before the end of the war. Nevertheless, there is no question that these are very formidable weapons with great potential. Our designers did not slumber either. New anti-submarine ships, such as the Castle-class corvettes, for example, were as similar to the first anti-submarine trawlers as modern guns are to a rifle bow. The actions of Loch Tulla were subject to the skill, intuition, and luck of the officers. The attacks of the Pevensey Castle were controlled by instruments. The Aztec was set about a third of the ship's length from the bow, where the noise of the water caused by its movement was minimal. Its beam went into the water at an angle of about 60 degrees to the surface. If the submarine passed at depths up to 75 feet, contact could be maintained as long as the target was about 100 feet from the bow of the hunter ship. But at the greater depths to which modern submarines can dive, contact is often lost as early as when the target is 100 yards away from the pursuer. Depth bombs can only be dropped from the stern of the attacking ship, creating a fairly significant blind spot that the ship must pass through after losing contact. In addition, the process of sinking depth bombs is not instantaneous. To reach a set depth, they take time, so an attentive submarine captain promptly barely heard the approaching noise of propellers, took a maneuver to get out from under the impact, and has a good chance to change course and move away to a safe distance by the time the bombs begin to explode. To overcome this obstacle, the first thing to do was to keep a constant sweep, so that the officer performing it could detect at any moment the slightest change in the direction of travel of the target. Next, it was necessary to launch the attack while still in contact, that is, dropping the bombs in front of the attacking ship, rather than from its stern. The first weapon designed on the basis of the new principle was called the Hedgehog. It dropped 24 small bombs that exploded on contact with the hull of the submarine. However, the Hedgehog had many disadvantages. The device was complex, too susceptible to unfavorable weather conditions, and the bombs were too small and had almost no chance to destroy the strong hull of the submarine. But at any rate, the development went in the right direction. Its follower Squid dropped fewer bombs, but they became heavier, flew farther and exploded at a set depth. These weapons proved more effective. Prior to the advent of forward firing, Captain Walker perfected the technique of preventing a submarine from evading at the last minute by attacking 3 or more ships, moving in a single line 50 yards apart. The method was extremely successful, but could only be used by support groups that did not need to defend the convoy. Such massive attacks dropped up to 80 depth bombs with only a few seconds between bursts. With a Squid on board, my 30th Escort Group sank the U-1200 with only 3 bombs. The progress in submarine destructive capability is obvious. Unfortunately, similar progress was not observed in the field of means of their detection, and the speed of the attacking ships increased frustratingly slow. We could probably destroy a Walther submarine travelling at 20 knots if we could find it, but finding her, using the ships we had at the time, was purely a matter of chance and luck. I confess I was glad that victory had spared us the necessity of attempting it. This was the general outline of the development of new equipment and weaponry on the opposing sides fighting the Battle of the Atlantic. At times the advantage was in the hands of one side, at other times in the hands of the other. Now, looking back, I can say with confidence our scientists and military engineers were able to develop effective countermeasures against the new weapons used by the enemy. There were times when the information about a German submarine chasing the convoy caused only misgivings among all the officers of the escort engaged in its protection. At the beginning of 1944, such news was greeted with delight. Now we had an opportunity to destroy another enemy. We were given a formidable weapon, and we were confident in its effectiveness. Leaving the Highlander, I was never again happy at sea. I gave this ship everything, and the first impression of the 30th Escort Group in no way reduced the deep sadness of parting with my favourite destroyer. On the 3 destroyers on which I served, most of the crews were old servicemen. The Loch Toll had mostly reservists, and the Verbena had half reservists and half old servicemen. The 30th Escort Group was manned by men who had joined the Navy already during the war. I can say only one thing about the officers, neither fish nor flesh. Becoming heirs of the inviolable traditions of the Western Approaches fleet, they were strikingly different from their predecessors. They had a different background, different views, different training. That said, I don't mean to say that they were inept, not at all. They were simply children of another age, the age of radar. It wasn't until I met my new commanders that I realized how much we had all changed in 5 years of war. The new captains were about 20 years younger than those who had commanded the ships in the first escort groups. They were young, and almost the same age. The oldest was no more than 2 years away from the youngest. The country had placed a heavy responsibility on their shoulders, which were not yet strong enough to bear the burden. They tried to be extremely serious and showed great concern for such trifles as filling out report forms. To some extent, this was justified. At this stage of the war, the long tentacles of bureaucracy had already penetrated to the front lines as well, and the amount of paperwork to be filled out on each ship was steadily increasing from month to month. It was no longer possible to bring a ship damaged by bad weather into port and to write off other faults to the weather at the same time, and the shortage of rum could not be explained as before given to the survivors of the wreck. In the early years of the war, which now seem so far away, one of our corvettes wrote off 10 gallons of rum in this way, which were later found stored under the bays of the towing cable. Since it was impossible to put them back on the books, we had to divide this suddenly acquired amount of rum among the ships of the group. In 1941 we walked around with eyes red from salt water and chronic sleep deprivation, but never missed an opportunity to laugh. That time had faded into oblivion. There was no doubt that the new people on the new ships would no longer exchange the signals that had once made us laugh. I remember once in the Atlantic, during a big swell, one of the corvettes approached the Verbena to send a visual signal. Rounding the convoy, the corvette jumped out of the water, partially exposing the bottom, and we did not miss the opportunity to semaphore him, "I see your dome." The reply was instantly given, "It is tactless and immodest of you to mention it." To be fair to my new group, I want to admit that some of the blame lay with me as well. I began to look back more and more often, and each time the past seemed more and more appealing to me. We lived at a very fast pace, never spared ourselves, and that must be why we burned out early, older than we really were. But there were other fundamental differences between me and the current generation of officers. I don't think any of the officers of the 30th Escort Group thought of a watch without radar. I don't argue, in many ways thanks to this useful device we managed to break German submarines. It significantly reduced the load experienced by officers, but at the same time its appearance became a kind of Rubicon in the life of each of us. You either had experience in convoy security before radar, or you didn't. One who became an officer after this revolutionary change cannot feel the incomparable satisfaction that comes from success achieved through your personal experience and skillful action, perhaps with a little bit of luck. He will never feel the thrill of excitement when, having spent the night on patrol, and approaching the position where the convoy should theoretically be, there is a shout from the forward "Look out, merchants, to starboard, sir." Even navigating had undergone striking changes during the war. The advent of the Loran navigation system killed the artistry, the poetry in a sailor's service. Now the work of determining one's location on the vast ocean was reduced to turning a few knobs on the instrument and finding the answer in a reference book. Yes, the sailor's life became simpler, but for this simplicity he paid an incredibly expensive price. He will never know the joy of going exactly to the intended point of shore after endless cloudy days when he never managed to see the sun and stars. It's easier and more accurate with instruments, of course, but I bet it's more fun without them. And people were different. They were products of their time, in which petty officers and sailors were distinguished not by experience and strength of character, but by the level of knowledge and education. I don't think there was a single person in my new group who, like the sailor and stoker from the Verbena, would have preferred to crawl on all fours to the ship, but not to be late for sailing. The new men either would not have brought themselves to such a state, or, if such a mishap occurred, would not have given themselves the trouble to think of returning. On previous ships I had always known all the crew by name. Here, however, I had not even memorized the names of the officers. One thing helped me to keep apart from the collective. On the ship where I settled as a senior officer, there was a captain. We went back to the group commander-captain problem. As before, these two on the same ship could not get along. For years I had had my own scullery, a sea cabin, a desk where I lost my own eraser and pencil. Now I would lose my pencil and find the captain's pencil and notice with annoyance that he had put my eraser in his pocket. To make life even more difficult, the ship had its own navigator, and my headquarters had its own. We all had to use the same navigator's desk. By the way, it is curious that sailors always tend to listen first of all to the opinion of a senior officer on a ship commanded by someone else. I think this is due to the well-known admiral complex. But although the commander of the anti-submarine trawler group and the senior officer of the escort group do partially perform the functions of an admiral, one should not lose sight of the fact that the working quarters of a real admiral and his staff are very isolated from those where the commander of the flagship and other officers work. If they had to work side by side, friction would be inevitable. I genuinely feel sorry for my captain, and I feel sorry for myself as well. Nevertheless, no matter how deep my regrets are, there is no doubt that without radar and accurate navigational instruments we could not have gained superiority over the enemy, for we were now confronted by improved submarines operating close to shore and using snorkels. One thoroughly brazen German even torpedoed a merchant ship. You might say, at our door it was just about to enter the mouth of the River Foyle. The 30th Escort Group went out to sea in search of the impudent. Working close to shore is not at all easy. It is necessary not only to ensure the safety of all the ships of the group when manoeuvring, but also to constantly examine the echoes marked by the ASDIC. Near shore, hundreds of contacts. are usually noted old shipwrecks, underwater rocks, and fast waters. If we conclude that the marked contacts are not submarines, they should be mapped. If, however, we find something new in waters where we have already worked, it is logical to assume that this new thing is a German submarine. Unfortunately, in places with fast currents, many contacts actually turn out to be ordinary whirlpools. The turbulent movement of water caused by the changing direction of the current during tidal action adds much confusion. During the first patrol with Squid, we attacked one of the contacts, which turned out to be the wreckage of a tanker carrying high-octane gasoline. From the explosions of our shells, gasoline ignited, and the ship turned into a huge fire. The height of the flames reached 200 to 300 feet. Fortunately, the captain was able to command full ahead, and we were able to move away in time. Only the paint on board was burned. This incident frightened me even more than the loss of the Warwick. By that time I had been commanding ships without interruption for 5 years apparently. Fatigue was beginning to take its toll. But I was stubbornly looking for the enemy submarine. The Germans were going to pay me for the Warwick. I was determined to hold out until I had sunk at least one. We patrolled the northwest approaches to St. George's Channel for 2 weeks, after which we returned to Londonderry. I went to the Commodore, informed him of my difficulties, and met with complete understanding. I asked to be allowed to remain captain myself, but to be given a secretary to do the paperwork. He agreed, and as the new corvette needed a captain, the captain from the Pevensey was sent to it. So I didn't feel guilty that it was my fault he lost the ship. The new scheme of command proved much more workable. I had a staff navigator to assist in the management of the ships of the group, and a clerk who stenographed what I said, and then drew up neat reports and accounts. To my great regret, the ship was difficult to control. It lacked the power of the machinery, so its seaworthiness left much to be desired. And since the radar and other new toys created excessive sail, when I reduced speed to investigate contact, the corvette was carried downwind like a rubber ball. It became impossible to keep its nose to the wave. It lay sideways to the wave, swaying like a pig carefully sliding in the mud, and the Aztec operators were more concerned with staying in their chairs than with examining the characteristics of a potential target. Had this corvette had 2 vehicles, and I think that was the case in the original design, they would have made very good hunters. Unfortunately, they were all built with only 1 car. The Pevensey Castle was twice the size of the Verbena, but had the same 1,200 horsepower. Its submarine hunting equipment, however, was excellent. At the time, the Germans were operating south of Ireland, looking for convoys where they appeared most often. By saturating the area of maximum congestion with hunter ships and aircraft, we kept them from doing too much damage, but we didn't destroy many of them. There was always a feeling that just a little more, and the Germans would have been able to do much more, because all of our efforts almost no result. The new German submarines, equipped with snorkels and acoustic torpedoes, were as different from the submarines of the beginning of the war as the Pevensey Castle was from Loch Tulla. With uniform levelling up, the bottom line did not change. Only unlimited air support helped tip the scales in our favour. The next patrol area was the southern coast of Ireland. The trip got off to a bad start. We put to sea in the first week of November 1944. No sooner had we left 2 miles from the dock than the helmsman left the helm without informing me. I usually took a pilot to pass a difficult stretch of fairway on the river, but I would never trust him to moor or unmoor a ship. As I passed Londonderry, I heard the pilot order starboard rudder 10 and saw the bow of the ship begin to shift to the left. This was followed by starboard 20 then. The ship suddenly veered sharply to the left almost across the fairway and stopped abruptly, hitting something. I jumped on the compass platform and called down full back. By this time the tide had already begun to ebb. The ship settled aft, vibrated and, as if reluctantly, slid down into deep water. I stopped the cars and sent the XO down to see if there was a hole. He reported over the phone that at first glance everything was intact. At this time I heard a trembling voice. "Helmsman at the helm, sir." "Where the hell have you been?" "In the latrine, sir." "I'll deal with you later." We set a reverse course, docked at the Lysahali oil jetty, and I telephoned Londonderry to send a diver to inspect the bow of the ship. Through the grace of Providence, we hit the only relatively gentle obstacle between Londonderry and the oil jetty. Even the pilot did not know that there was a build-up of tin in this area. Investigation revealed that our very young helmsman had let our very young helmsman hold the wheel to a sailor who happened to be nearby and turned it the wrong way. We arrived in the patrol area on November 9th, having orders to seek and destroy the enemy if they could be found. We were told that convoys would be passing through here, and we were to sweep the area in front of them and be on standby in case of enemy attack. We were also to keep in touch with the patrol planes in case they found anything interesting. On top of that, we could do whatever we wanted: track, scout, sniff out the long-awaited prey. As we began to explore each contact, we found that we were moving so slowly against the ground that even the sleepiest submarine would get away from us without the slightest effort. I believed that the Germans would rather do something than just drift aimlessly at the will of the waves. If they were on the move, however, the Aztec contact would be sustained. So we mostly spent our time combing the area at high speed. If any ship noted a suspicious echo, that ship was to slow down and investigate the contact. The rest of us would close ranks and move on. By the end of the day on November 10th, we had already scoured our patrol area from the west, and shortly after dark lay down on a westerly course. At 10 o'clock I was resting, lying on a bunk in my sea cabin. On the bulkhead above my feet was a radar screen repeater. To see the location of all the ships in the group, I just had to turn on my back. At night at sea we were always in total darkness. Sometimes only very faint red light was allowed. The group of 4 ships were positioned to starboard and port of the Pevensey Castle, 1 ship heading north, and 2 to the south of it. On the radar screen, the ships were reflected as small glowing dots, periodically hitting the light search beam. When the beam passed, they dimmed, only to glow again with their former cheerfulness when it crawled over them once more. The beam moved relentlessly in circles. Hypnotized by its measured, monotonous movements, I fell asleep. The night was calm. The ship rocked evenly. The rotating beam hypnotized me persistently. The ship's movements rocked me to sleep. Suddenly I thought I saw a tiny glowing dot behind one of the ships. Yes, there it was, the instantaneous flash when the beam passed. Instantly waking up, I grabbed the phone and contacted the radar operator. "What's that on our radar on a bearing of about 145 degrees? "An echo. 10,000 yards behind the Porchester Castle." I kept my eyes on the beam. Radar surveyed the space around us, covered by the dark blanket of night. "Yes, sir. A slight echo, but quite distinct. I've never seen anything like it, sir. Conditions are rather strange tonight. Something's happening in the atmosphere. The beam is spreading in a very unusual manner." "What do you mean?" "Don't give me any high scientific explanations. Keep it simple, please." "Today, sir, the echoes can be picked up farther than usual." "Does that apply to all ships?" "I can't say for sure, sir. I think it depends on the particular device." "You mean that normally we can detect a surfaced submarine 5 miles away, but today, for some unknown reason, your device can detect it much farther away. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir." "Thank you. Keep an eye on the echo. It's of great interest to me." "I'm watching the echo, sir." I picked up another phone. It was a short-wave intercom for talking to other ships. "This is the Porchester Castle. Do you have a contact on radar, bearing about 100 degrees, distance 10,000 yards? I asked impatiently. "No, sir." "It's quite clear on my screen. I'll keep watch. Put a separate observer in that direction. I'll let you know if anything happens." I sent for the navigator to chart the data. Pretty soon he reported. "The target is travelling on a course almost parallel to ours. The speed is also about the same as ours, maybe a little faster. I've called Porchester Castle again." "Any contact?" "No, sir." "I've called for officers." "I got a very interesting echo, bearing 147 degrees, distance 19,000 yards. You should have thought it over. The target was single and small, or it would certainly have appeared on the Porchester Castle's radar. There were no fishing boats, and if there had been a fisherman, he would have been using navigation lights, so the Porchester Castle would have seen him. There seemed to be only one answer: it was a German submarine, which I had been searching for unsuccessfully for 5 long years. And the boat, by the looks of it, promised to be very handy. It was clearly watching us and preparing to attack, thinking we were a convoy. I picked up the intercom receiver again. Ships to slowly form a chain to a heading of 105 degrees to 285 degrees. New course 240 degrees, speed 10 knots. Complete maneuvers within 30 minutes. Previously, they were all at right angles to our course. In the new position, the group's axis will be at a 45-degree angle to our direction of travel. I kept my eyes on the radar screen. The echoes were perfectly clear. I could see the ships starting to reorganize. That's actually how you fight a war, lying on a bunk in a warm cabin. 5 minutes later, I got a call from the navigator. It looks like that echo's after us. I couldn't agree with you more. Perhaps his captain thinks we're a convoy. You know the shortcomings of German radar. He'll only see 5 little blips on the screen, nothing else. The cloud cover is low today, which means the German must be hoping for no aircraft. But why is there no echo on any radar except ours? Anyway, watch and let me know when he changes course. Yes, I would feel more confident if this contact was confirmed from at least one of the ships. I called the radar operator again. Distance? 16,000 yards, sir. The next call was to the navigator. Target speed? A little over 14 knots. I've been called from the Porchester Castle. Confirming contact, sir. Weak, but fairly steady. Should I check it out? No, stay in bed for now. I'll tell you when to get up. I've hailed all ships. I estimate the target, bearing 150 degrees, distance 15,000 yards, is a German submarine. I intend to follow the former course until the target is on a bearing of 180 degrees, then turn toward it together. In this way, the boat will be in the middle of the area to be combed. Good luck. Signal from the Porchester Castle. He's coming towards me. Answer. Yes. What makes you better than the others? Signal from Launceston Castle. Confirming contact. Signal from Kenilworth Castle. I've got him too. I've ordered the group to reduce speed to 6 knots. This should come as a surprise to the enemy, because his instruments will not allow him to notice the speed reduction immediately, so his bearing towards my ship will change rapidly, moving towards 180 degrees, and I was just waiting for that. His bearing was indeed changing quite rapidly, 165 degrees, 170 degrees. The net's abandoned. He's got to hit it. I was determined to get that German. I called all ships. Prepare to turn. Target is on bearing 178 degrees from me, distance 10,000 yards. I've requested the Porchester Castle. Report target coordinates. 230 degrees, 3,000 yards. He's trapped. I relayed to the ships in the group. Turn 180 degrees. Speed 12 knots. Let's go, boys. Then I gave the necessary orders to the bridge of my own ship. I was summoned by the navigator. Will you come to the chart, sir? Not yet. I want to see everything, and I can see it best from here. I'll come up when the boat dives. Looking at the radar, I could see the dot's ships changing shape, changing course. The target was in place. Or was it? I jumped up from my bunk. The target was no longer on the screen. Message from the Porchester Castle. Contact lost. I think the target has submerged. Message from Launceston Castle. Very small target in previous position, possibly periscope 180 degrees, 2,500 yards. Another message from Launceston Castle. Very strange sounds on the Aztec. Could be an acoustic torpedo, I replied. I've already crossed my fingers for you. There's contact at 182 degrees Aztec, distance 1,500 yards. Should I attack? If you would be so kind. I'll send the Porchester to assist you. And then, to his officers, the Porchester supports the Launceston Pevensey, and Kenilworth are organising a search around the dive site. There was a deafening underwater explosion. I immediately called Launceston Castle. Was that you? No, sir. The torpedo must have exploded on the bottom. The target is a German submarine. That's right. Message from the Launceston Castle. The attack. The ocean shook with explosions. I went to the bridge. We could hear conversations between the attacking ships. Do you have contact? Yes, clear and concise. Do you smell oil? There's plenty of it around. Do you have contact? Yes, plain and simple, like 2 times 2. When I've finished searching the dive area, I've called in the attack ships. If you're both in contact with the target, I guess we won't attack again until dawn. Perhaps we'll find some people. And then only to the Launceston Castle, how do you assess the attack? It's textbook. I've got everything distance and depth. Target's on the bottom. Mark the position with a buoy. We'll stay here for another 72 hours. The next morning I steered the Pevensey Castle over the German submarine and got a clear picture with the sonar. The boat was undoubtedly lying on the bottom with a slight roll to starboard. I then carried out an attack using our squid. A canister with a hamburger dress was thrown to the surface. There were lots of air bubbles, and the surface was covered with a film of diesel, but no people were anywhere to be seen. We remained in place for 3 days, then continued patrolling. After 14 days, we returned to Londonderry. After the submarine episode, I was constantly in a strange lethargy, apathy. We rounded Rathlin Island, and an hour after sunset came to the mouth of the River Foyle. Here we were met by a strong north wind. The mouth of the river is on the west side of Loch Foyle Bay, and the entrance to the bay is obstructed by a long sandbank called Magilligan Point, which extends like a breakwater to the narrow entrance to the mouth of the river. As we approached the mouth, the waves were beating against our side, and the sandbank on the port side was about a mile distant. Suddenly the bow of the ship jerked to the left. "What the hell are you doing, helmsman?" "The ship's not steering, sir." I immediately called the engine room. "Chief, we've got something wrong with the steering engine. You'd better hurry up and find out what's wrong. Report to me immediately." After a few minutes that seemed like years, the chief called. "It's bad, sir. We're going to have to go to manual control. Can I work my way back?" "No, sir. The rudder is just under the starboard side. If it gets pressurized, we won't be able to connect the manual controls." "Hurry up. You have very little time." I had hoped to correct the position by turning back, because most single-screw ships then turned stern to windward. But if the rudder was turned all the way to the left, the manoeuvre was useless. All I could do was wait and pray that the chief had time to do what was necessary. I ordered the chief mate to gather the men in the locker with life jackets and inflated mine. Unlike when I had tried in vain to inflate it on the bridge of the Warwick, this time it worked perfectly. I nestled myself in a corner. It was a pleasure to move around in it, and thought. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, no, it's better not to think about it. Better not to think about it at all. Signal from the Porchester Castle. "Ready to take you in tow." "No thanks," I said. "There's too much on-board rocking to start the towing equipment. Still, I'm touched. We mustn't lose 2 ships. If we get beached, please notify the Coast Guard to meet the swimmers." I took a look and glowed like Aldis's signal lamp. The water was brown and murky due to sand lifted from the bottom. The count was now running into minutes. Finally the phone rang and I learned that the manual controls had been hooked up. No more than a quarter of an hour had passed since the breakdown. Right rudder 30, full ahead. Desperately rocking from side to side, the Pevensey Castle began to move forward. The ships of the group were scattered over a fairly large area. They fought the weather as best they could and awaited further developments. As we crawled through the entrance, They took turns following us. A chiff came up on the bridge. "Serious malfunction, sir. There's nothing we can do on our own. We'll have to dock." I was shivering so badly I had to grab the handrail to stay on my feet. I ordered the group to anchor and follow me up the river in the morning. We went up the river that evening, and as the ship was manually steered, I asked for a tug for a mooring. Shortly after 10 o'clock the ship was at the wharf. I breathed a sigh of relief and went to my cabin. "Well, this is it," I informed myself. "Here we are." And that was the plain truth. I could no longer trust myself. My body wouldn't obey my commands. I looked at myself in the mirror and froze. Not so long ago, my friends had told me that I looked too young and unserious to be a commander. No one would say anything like that to me now. I guess the candle had burned out. I went down to the dock and called the Commodore. I had no doubt that even at this late hour he would be there. Max Horton was in the habit of calling his subordinates after dinner. The Commodore was indeed there, and I told him my request. "I've been expecting this for a long time," he admitted. "When would you like to go ashore?" "The sooner the better, sir." "I can have the paperwork ready for you by noon the day after tomorrow." "Thank you, sir." "Come see me tomorrow morning." "Yes. Congratulations on the submarine." I went back to the ship and took a long bath. And 2 days later I stepped off the gangway of my ship for the last time. This was 5 years and 2 months after I had first gone on deck of His Majesty's trawler, Loch Tull. It was much longer than I had bargained for before I was able to leave Londonderry. Many urgent matters could have been accomplished more quickly if I had continued to attend to them myself. In addition, I had to fulfill a number of obligatory formalities, passing a medical examination. Although the command knew very well that if an officer was too tired to continue commanding a ship, he must be given a break, or else the case could end in tragedy, it was formally necessary to get medical confirmation. It was an undoubted merit of the Navy that any officer who felt that he could not continue to serve with the same efficiency could come to his commanding officer without fear of being misunderstood. I did not arrive home until the beginning of December. While in Liverpool, I telephoned Max Horton. "I'm very sorry, sir, about the way things ended." "What do the doctors say, Rayner?" 3 weeks sick leave for now, sir. Will you be able to go to sea after that?" "I doubt that very much, sir. As a matter of fact, I'm physically fit, just burned out. Can you find work for me ashore?" "You bet I can. German submarines now appear just off the coast, and my groups often work under the operational control of other units in the fleet in Portsmouth, Plymouth, Rosyth, and even on the Nore. The divisions in the Channel at Portsmouth and Plymouth will, in my opinion, witness the enemy's last desperate attempt to cut our communication with the continent. The local staffers are totally ignorant of the group's capabilities. Not long ago, some cretin ordered a group of Castle corvettes to follow an unrealistic course in inclement weather at a speed impossible for them. Result: 6 damaged Aztec domes and the entire group headed for dry dock. I've just received Admiralty authorization to send a senior escort officer to each unit where our groups are operating. Price will go to Plymouth and you to Portsmouth. Let's see 3 weeks leave." "That's fine. You'll report to the fleet commander in Portsmouth on January 1st. I think you'll need a great deal of tact and patience. And remember, you are my envoy. If you need help, contact the Chief of Staff." The reader can hardly imagine how grateful I was for this appointment. After all, I had to swallow a bitter pill after 5 years of training. I lasted only 2 months and broke down. The chance to do something truly rewarding became the best medicine for me. I had a wonderful 3 weeks with my family. We had a fun Christmas together. I genuinely enjoyed every minute of it after all. In the past 5 years, I had never been home for more than 10 days at a time. After Christmas, just before New Year's Day, I visited the Chief of Staff of the Western Approaches Fleet, and on January 1st, 1945, I arrived at the Portsmouth Fleet Command Headquarters, which was stationed at Fort Southwick. This was my first staff position. Prior to that, I was constantly on the other side of the gigantic divide that exists between those who walk the ships and take orders from the staff men and the shore officers who plan operations. How many times have I had to give a bad word to a staff officer who, sitting in a warm room where neither snow, rain, nor piercing wind penetrates, orders me to steer a ship down the Foyle River in zero visibility conditions? I once even called one such Jupiter, clearly unwilling to get down from his Olympus. Do you even look out of your window into the street once in a while? Do you really think I would jeopardize the ship and drive it down the Foyle in these weather conditions? Outside the window, in case you haven't noticed, it's snowing so thick I can't even see the bow of the ship. I'm sorry Jupiter condescended to talk to me, but the ship is due in the Innistrahall area tomorrow morning to pick up part of the convoy from the Clyde. All the other escort ships have sustained weather damage. We won't be able to repair them and put them to sea until a week from now. All right then, with your permission, I'll still wait a few hours until the current is set so that I'm going against it the whole way. Then, if there is no acceptable visibility, I can at least drop anchor and the ship will not be turned around. If that's agreeable to you, I promise to be there on time. We reached a compromise that time. But I remember many occasions when I was quite sure that if I had been in the operational headquarters at that moment myself, I would have made a completely different decision. Now I had to see if I was right at the time. I felt like a newcomer and had a very vague idea of my future responsibilities. Besides, I was from another fleet group, which did not make my task any easier. Too much depended on whether I could cooperate with my colleagues. The first thing I realized quite clearly was that my situation was going to be very difficult. All of the commanders on the staff were career officers, but had temporary ranks commensurate with their positions. All of them were 15 to 20 years older than me. Most of them had left active duty before the war with the rank of lieutenant commander and were given the temporary rank of commander after enlistment. They made a very strong command and were assembled at Fort Southwick for the invasion of Normandy. For some unknown reason, they thought they could handle the appearance of a few German submarines at their doorstep without the help of the Western Approaches fleet. Frankly, I was shocked to discover that, due to my compliance status, I was senior to the commanders at Fort Southwick. This automatically gave me a number of additional responsibilities. I had to take a seat at the head of the table in the mess hall, and most unpleasantly, my arrival meant that one of the officers had to give up his room to me. All these things may seem trivial and petty in time of war, but when a lot of people have to spend all their time together, they willy-nilly have to get along somehow. Friction in one place can put the whole mechanism out of action. After tea, I was invited by the chairman of the Officers' Society. On the way I left my things in the common hall, the question of a room had not yet been settled. "It's all so unpleasant," he sighed, inviting me to sit down. Yes, I can see that I agreed. Let me assure you that I would prefer to avoid any misunderstandings. After a little thought, I said, "Let's reason. Everyone thinks that I am a member of the staff of the fleet commander in Portsmouth, but I'm not. The Admiralty officially assigned me here only to deal with financial matters. In fact, I'm attached to the Western Approaches fleet and have no intention of leaving it. You must admit I can't be stationed here and there at the same time. Let's be clear, I am not a member of this fleet. I'm a guest, I'm here to do some work. For this purpose I need a room, and it is absolutely indifferent to me whether it will be together with other senior officers or not." This solution suited everyone. Nothing had to be changed in the living quarters or at the table. The new duties at first seemed unfamiliar and not too clear to me. The advent of radar completely changed what little I had been taught about staff work before the war. At that time, if ships were sent out to patrol a particular area, it was entirely the prerogative of the senior officer to choose how to carry out the order. Now, with a network of radar stations covering virtually the entire channel, HQ had the ability to plan the movement of ships on a minute-by-minute basis, as well as monitor the execution of their orders. Moreover, they could control in real time the tactical actions of ships at sea. Borrowing experience from aviators, sailors began to control ships in the same way that pilots control fighter planes, directing groups at the enemy. Again, as in the old days when Commander Boyle and I made a joint voyage on the Havelock, I became convinced that he who controls the movement of the ship commands the battle. I always had 3 or 4 groups of corvettes, or frigates from the Western Approaches Group 15 to 20 ships, and Portsmouth's own anti-submarine force 25 trawlers, and about a dozen ASDIC torpedo boats. With this force I had to provide close escort for convoys and patrolling the area. I also had to work quite closely with the coastal aviation to direct the ships to where the submarines were spotted from the air, to make sure that their patrol routes were interconnected with the routes of surface ships. Audrey Parker, the women's auxiliary officer, was directly in charge of the anti-submarine trawlers. I think she was the only woman who made her way into operations. She sat in the office at the next desk, and we had a very productive partnership. She was good at her job, and if it hadn't been for her, I wouldn't have been able to leave the fort for a minute. But I made it a rule to take a 1-hour bike ride every day, and I stuck to it. Our workroom was underground, never had daylight. Because of this, many of us had an impaired sense of time and did not notice the passing hours. When the most interesting operations took place, we usually stayed in the dungeon for quite a long time. Only the insistent demands of our stomachs would bring us to the surface, often only to find that breakfast was long gone and our hunger could only be satisfied by coffee and rolls in the mess hall. Fort Southwick was located away from the anchorage, so I almost never got to meet up with friends. However, when a very old friend of mine brought his captain-class frigate in for repairs, which took time, I did my best to get aboard I really wanted to see and talk. Audrey Parker helped me a lot in this operation. We organised a car and boat so that I could get back to the site quickly if there was an emergency. When the appointed day arrived, I sent a message to the captain to expect me to visit and, if possible, treat me to lunch. Upon calling the signal tower, I was surprised to hear that my message had not yet been relayed. There was a complication. It was so unlike my friend's ship, punctual in every way, even in the smallest details, that I began to speculate. The most probable one seemed to me to be that there had been a change of captain on the frigate. After some time I was informed that the message had been transmitted, and after much hesitation I decided not to cancel the trip. When the boat came aboard, the ship seemed lifeless. No one even came out to catch the end. I climbed aboard with difficulty, and in the silence of the extinct ship I heard the flick of a signal lamp. When it stopped, the captain's head appeared high above the bridge rail. "I'm sorry I didn't meet you," he received the message. "Come up," what I exclaimed. "That way? That high up? What happened to your cabin?" "I'll tell you when you get up there." With these words the head disappeared. Panting and panting, for lack of practice, I climbed up. I didn't see a soul on the way up. "Where did you put the team?" I asked, sitting down on the compass platform. "They're on vacation." "What, all of them?" I exclaimed. Yes, he nodded, remaining extremely serious. "You see, I let half the men go before the 10th, and the other half from the 10th. But I didn't take into account that those going on vacation today will want to leave early in the morning, and those returning won't arrive until late in the evening. So I'm on my own for now." "Is that so?" "Yes, that's right." "Well done. What else can I say? So we'll have our lunch here, on a patch of land, open to all winds, and the captain will keep a signal watch." "Quite right," agreed my friend cheerfully. "I hope you don't mind. I even prepared a bottle of your favourite wine." "Of course not, but I wish your boat was ready to go to sea. I'd be sure to find you a suitable job. Can you imagine the headlines, 'Captain goes to sea alone on 1,500-ton frigate'?" When the boat came for me 2 hours later, he did come down to see me off. "I'll be sure to send you some message right away," I shouted as the boat was leaving the frigate. "I'll try to think of a longer one." "I won't read it. I'll just mark the time," said my friend. "The signalman, when he arrives, will ask for a repeat." As far as I can remember, I've always had a chance to rest after lunch. Only once in my memory, and that was when, torpedoing the Salopian, did the Germans attack in the afternoon. Also, the hours from 4 to 8 a.m. were usually free for sleeping, unless of course I had to help clean up the mess after the night before. One had the impression that in this matter the Germans were clearly adhering to the rules. Working ashore did not provide for such rest periods. During the first 3 weeks I slept only intermittently, because the reports of submarine sightings by the pilots came in constantly, and whether I thought them true or false still had to be checked. Fortunately, we had an excellent chief of staff in the person of Commodore R. W. Simmons Tyler. I had met him back in 1932 when he was serving as chief mate on the Hood. He always tried to help me, and as time went on I felt quite content with my life, something I had not expected when I went to shore work. There were always at least 2 enemy submarines in our area. Sometimes, if my colleague in Plymouth, Commander Price, was making things too tense for uninvited guests, they would appear near us to see if our part of the channel would be quieter. Then I would organize a hunt and drive them back. Likewise, sometimes my visitors would be forced to remove themselves to a section of Price's net, and he would bring them back to me very quickly. We employed about 40 ships and 4 airplanes to constantly search the area from Dover to Portland Bill for German submarines. But in 4 months we only managed to destroy 2 submarines. One we sank after she attacked a merchant ship. The other, detected from the air, was driven into a minefield. On top of these not-so-impressive successes, we lost 4 merchant ships in the same period. One I have just mentioned, and the second was probably blown up by our own mine, which broke anchor and swam away. We had a heated argument about the cause of the second ship's destruction. I argued that the weather was completely unsuitable for an attack from an underwater position. In other words, the submarine could only attack from a surface position, which in turn was impossible, because in that area the Germans would never risk surfacing in any weather. We were quite close to London, so we were often treated to surprise visits from all sorts of high-ranking officials and military men who wanted to know what a command post like ours was like, as well as to learn some of the details relating to D-Day. When the merchant ship was torpedoed and we sent ships out to hunt for the submarine, one of the delegations was just at our place. The officers arriving that day were from the Polish Navy. They were preparing to organize training at home. Neither the sinking of a merchant ship nor the detection of an enemy submarine from the air caused us much fuss. We were experienced enough men and just did our job. 2 escort groups covered the convoy. One was sent out to search, and another was dispersed on the edge of the area of possible enemy location. The German boat was quickly detected and destroyed. The group that sank it remained in the area of the boat's destruction. Sailors from the sunken merchant ship were brought aboard and taken to the nearest port. Another group went out for patrolling. All in all, it was business as usual. A day that had not started well had ended in success, but our guests were shocked. Later, one of them said to me, "You English are murderously calm. I don't understand you at all. You have no excitement, no gusto." He waved his hands, unable to find the right word. "It's unnatural. A ship has been torpedoed. There's a woman officer sitting at a table with a map. She's got legs you can't take your eyes off, and she's putting a red dot on the map. And yet she's perfectly calm. Nobody raises their voice. You write orders. Ships move on the map and on the sea. And again, no one worries. The woman sits calmly, crossing her marvelous legs. The German submarine is destroyed, and the woman continues to sit in the same posture, as if nothing significant had happened. And you suggest I go for a drink. You English are the most dangerous people on earth. You cannot be fought." I must admit I was amused by my guest's emotion. "After us, you're going to Liverpool, aren't you? There you will see a similar command centre at Derby House, but it's much bigger than ours. They've got the whole of the North Atlantic under their control. They don't have a map on a table like we do. It's huge and it hangs on the wall. To mark the position of a boat on it, the servicewomen have to climb up a ladder." "Girls climb ladders?" he wondered. Yes, I smirked, catching the bizarre twist in his thoughts, but they wear pants. The first time I was in a headquarters where there were officers of both sexes, and in equal numbers, I wondered at first how they could work together. My bewilderment was further increased when, after the conversation I have already described with the president of the local officers' society, I was given a room on the side of the fort where the junior officers and women of the Women's Auxiliary were quartered. I was curious whether there was another country in this world where such a thing was possible without subsequent trouble. For, leaving aside the fact that the ladies occupied the bathroom considerably longer than it takes the average individual to wash his own body, they were excellent companions. The feminine hand made their rooms something more than the usual hole in the ground equipped with a standard dresser, closet and bed. Most of the girls had managed to stock up on small bars, and often treated us to hot cocoa. Occasionally, of course, the temper would break out and chaos would reign for a short time, with sheets, pillows and human bodies milling about in the hallways, but it was rare. Almost all of the staff, except for Audrey Parker and me, were on watch, and we were just rotating shifts. If one of us wasn't at the card, there was bound to be another. The chance for a good night's sleep was too rare to be neglected. I only dwell on this so much because after the war there were so many books that argued just the opposite. Women in our service made their own, quite significant contribution to the cause of the common victory. Many military acquaintances later led to marriage, but there were almost no promiscuous relationships in the expectation that the war will write it all off. But back to the war. The truth was that we used huge forces, and the result was the destruction of 2 enemy submarines. On the other hand, the constant threat of enemy attack in our territorial waters, by and large, remained a threat. I believe that this stage of the war can be called positional. Both sides were powerless to harm each other, and high-speed submarines with water engines were on their way. What could happen if these formidable weapons appeared on the battlefield? Almost always the submarine's snorkel was spotted from an airplane. This was followed by an attack with 1 or 2 depth bombs. Almost all reports of submarine sightings came at night, and a night attack by an airplane on an enemy submarine is nothing more than a warning you are detected. Next, we will throw so many anti-submarine ships into the area that the boat is bound to get trapped. And if the area has a clean bottom with no shipwrecks to confuse the hunters, as well as complex swirling currents that add to the headaches of Aztec operators, the boat will be found and destroyed quite quickly. But with the numerous shipwrecks left over from World War I, joined by ships sunk between the wars and already in this war, as well as countless currents, tides, current swirls, and other traps for the Aztecs, the enemy managed to slip away time and time again. Yes, we forced him on the defensive and almost prevented him from advancing. But our nets couldn't catch the new submarines, which could move faster underwater than the hunter ships on the surface. We got our soldiers out of Dunkirk and Norway, out of Crete. We delivered supplies to them at Tobruk and Benghazi, escorted convoys along the long and perilous route around the Cape of Good Hope. We landed an army in North Africa and ferried it to Sicily and Salerno. We guarded the ships on D-Day. Now the army took over. It was she who brought Germany to her knees and prevented the final stage in submarine warfare from even beginning. When Germany fell, Walther's first submarine was ready to go to sea. She was sunk by the Germans and was raised well after the victory. The 2 submarines that were surrendered at Portsmouth were in excellent condition, and the morale of the submariners was at the highest level. They evidently hoped that if the war had lasted another 6 months, they would have been the saviours of the fatherland. Although their hopes were obviously unfounded. Germany was finally defeated.